And I wrote recently about, because I believe commercials are an expression of art, even if they're corporate and they're about maximizing profits. Nike's shift to me was fascinating. Their Olympics ad was called "Winning Isn't for Everyone," and it's Willem Dafoe is the Green Goblin voice asking, "Am I a bad person?" And
I'm maniacal.
Yeah, so you've seen it. Nice,
Oh, yeah.
nice. So we don't need too much exposition there. But that, to me, was a major shift from where they had been, where they were more sensitive and inclusive, and anyone can be a winner sort of mentality, which isn't very interesting and apparently wasn't charismatic enough to get people buying Nike. But this sort of thing is, and it's messy, it's complicated. That's what art often is. The idea that a great athlete can also, in a bad way or in one way, be a bad person, or that qualities that make them great and aspirational and make them a hero are maybe indivisible from what makes them a bit of a villain. That's really interesting. And I think when your principal mandate is not being offensive, it does just cut against the grain of risk, and it cuts against the grain of art. And it's no wonder that the most popular comedians of the last few years are being assailed by journalists. And it seems as though a lot of the people acting as arbiters on what is good art are oddly conformist and almost anti-art. It seems as though we've invited a lot of vegans into the steakhouse to review it on Yelp. And
that's such a good analogy.
I think maybe there's a vibe shift against that. It's still there. There's not too much out there that I think is truly subversive when you watch TV, but maybe, just maybe, Kat, the worm is turning.
I think that is probably right. I'm cautiously optimistic because I also think a lot of what we would call, I don't know, wokeness or the DEI aesthetic has been very much entrenched at the highest levels of where culture is being created. And there's like a bureaucratic element to it. You've got like this entire group of people who are now administrators in charge of making sure that things conform to this vision. And like, they don't want to lose their jobs, so they're going to keep doing what they're doing. Unfortunately, we have like now this entire apparatus that is paying people to continue perpetuating all of the things that like I personally loathe about culture over the past 10 years. But it's so interesting that you mentioned the Nike thing. Like, I mean, I think like a lot of people who are not explicitly into sports media, I started reading your stuff when you first wrote about the Nike like sort of identity crisis and about how they were trying to become softer. And I was really, really interested reading your account of the creation of the new commercial, the Winning Isn't for Everyone one, that like Nike's attempt to pivot into a more sensitive kind of persona was basically rejected by consumers. Nobody liked it. Whereas this commercial, it's the same Rotten Tomatoes effect that you see elsewhere. People, like normal people, love this commercial. And the people who are in charge of creating media, like media criticism about the advertising world, absolutely hate it. And these are just like the Venn diagram of these populations has very little overlap.
It does have very little overlap. And the publication I referenced, it invoked Andrew Tate when looking at this Nike ad. And I thought to myself, no, it's not like Andrew Tate. But you are part of why somebody like Andrew Tate gets more purchase than you ever would think. Because if you sand away a lot of what's interesting in culture and what's a little bit dangerous, then a guy like that is going to have more of a say or more of an audience that just feels pulled to him, or at least that's my thought behind it. It's just funny that something like a Nike ad that has no ostensible politics or ideology is instantly read by people in those cultural spaces as having an enemy ideology. That, I mean, this is part of the sickness right now, is that everything is about everything all the time and nothing is divorced from its political social messaging. So it invokes or it galvanizes this totalitarian impulse to worry constantly and shout down anything that falls outside the confines.
Mm-hmm. I mean, on the subject of everything is about everything all the time, I'm having all of these galaxy brained moments where I'm thinking that the old Nike and the new Nike is really like the feminized Nike versus the return to a masculinized Nike. And one of the big things, when you talk about Andrew Tate, I mean, it's like a very prominent element in the culture right now and has been over the past few years that male sexuality and kind of the default way that it is has been very much demonized as predatory to the point where, men are now nervous about approaching women, like flirting with women, asking women out, because there's this idea that like even to do that is inherently assaultive in some way, or you're violating them in some way. And I think it's such a terrible thing, because the fact is, when you frighten men with like new social norms that say approaching a woman, expressing your interest in a woman is not okay, the only people who are left who are willing to do that are people who don't care about violating norms, people like Andrew Tate. So now you've got like the only person who's still behaving in a traditionally masculine way, or recognizably traditionally masculine, is basically a sociopath. And that's who people are looking to, because there are literally no other models for it.
Well, I agree with that. And I also think it's part of the growth of group chats, and men in group chats. That's a way that they can discuss things, because it did become oddly a little dangerous just to talk about how attractive a celebrity woman might be out on social media. So group chat is a place to do that. And then I guess there is a way to do it, but you need to have a Japanese etiquette level understanding of how to do it. I have this memory, it's stuck in my mind from a few years ago. There was a basketball player, women's basketball player, Liz Cambage, not sure. She eventually flamed out. She was a very interesting character, but she showed up to a game pre-COVID wearing some sort of ninja mask, and there might have been a little bit of a BDSM aesthetic to it. And I remember one of the men who covers the WNBA tweeted, "Not sure to be terrified or," in parentheses, "redacted." And that conveyed in this way that he found her attractive in that moment, and that he was lusting after her in that moment, but it could only be conveyed in this way where he's letting you know he feels that way, but there's this cutesy sort of redacted. And it just stuck in my mind as, it's so odd, the rules and the hoops right now when it comes to men. Just, you can't just say, "Hey, I think she looks hot." You can't do that. Well, I guess you can't do that. I guess you're in a position where that's impossible, but you can do that, but only if you do it in this particular kind of cutesy way.
I'm just thinking about the film critic who got canceled for saying that he thought Elastigirl in The Incredibles was hot.
Who is Elastigirl? Let me look at this.
It's the mom. It's the mom in The Incredibles.
Did he get fired? What happened?
I don't know if he got, I hope not. But he definitely became the main character in a bad way on the internet for a solid week. And I think had to maybe apologize or something like that. It was at kind of peak madness at the moment that type of madness was a big thing. I don't think that he would get canceled for saying it now, which maybe is another indication of the vibe shift that we've been discussing. But I do remember this, and I remember seeing it and thinking, "Oh dear," and just being glad in that moment that I was not a man, because it just seemed like it was a really difficult time to be navigating the media landscape.